maybe we could just start by saying something about why we're here, Linden, and what we're doing. So from my perspective, we're trying to develop a series of pieces around what Raymond Williams means to me in terms of at this particular point in the centenary year, and thinking about how that works to illuminate some of his thinking and work, particularly at the moment when so much of society and community that we've perhaps treasured in many ways is under such threat. So I wonder if I could begin by asking you just to say something about who you are, Linden, and where you're coming from in terms of Raymond Williams's work.
Yeah, my name is Linden West. I mean, I now work as a professor of education in Canterbury Christ Church University, which actually is not a million light years away from where Raymond Williams did some of his teaching, including in Bexhill and Hastings and places like that. So I've been making imaginative journeys to imagine what it was like in his classrooms with some of the characters he came across. My own biography has parallels with Raymond Williams. I'm not, a very distinguished person. I'm not claiming to be that, but I do think there are similarities as well as differences. I don't know how it is with you, Sharon, when you're working or writing. I feel as though sometimes I have a dialogue going on, not just in my head, but in my heart, in my whole body, about, well, how do bits of me relate to bits of you, whoever it is I'm working on, exactly. Or whoever it is I'm writing about, and that's very true at the moment. The similarities are that we both worked for the WA one way or another over many, many years, although Raymond, of course, began working in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s, and I did teaching for the Post Office Engineering Union, WEA, in trade union studies, but that's much later. But I didn't work full time for the WA until 1982. Yeah. And Raymond, I think, in the early 60s had moved on to a lectureship in Cambridge and then a professorship, of course. So there's that overlap, and I knew he was around, but I never actually, I don't think I ever met him. And then another part of my identity, I guess, has to do with, for a range of reasons, actually, I worked in adult education. I guess there was stuff in my personal life that, and in my relational life, that needed to be looked at. So I went into psychoanalysis for quite a period. And in emerging from that, I think I've wondered how that relates to aspects of, as it were, radical thinking. Yeah. And too often, and it's a thing I've struggled with, I think anything with psycho in the frame, anything with the label therapeutic tends to be kind of classified as not very radical, and somehow encouraging people to accept the established order of things. Yeah, that's not my experience. No, although I understand where people are coming from, and very recently, in fact, coming across various writings. I should mention that I'm doing a talk on Raymond Williams in Border Country on April the 13th, and perhaps I could mention one or two of the things that are going on. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. But I came across a piece of writing by Mike Rustin, who I have a lot of respect for. He's someone who has a radical social and cultural perspective, but he's also, I think, has a deep interest in psychoanalysis and has done a lot of work with the Tavistock. And I don't know where Raymond Williams encountered Freud, but I do think that he had an interest, but some ambivalence. I think he talked to Freud's individualism, but I think he would have been much more at peace with the kind of object relations theorists, those who are interested in the kind of making of humanity in the context of our relationships one with another, often in conscious and unconscious ways. And I think that would have been more interest to him. Yeah, it made me think of structure of feeling, Linden, because this is something I'm tussling with at the moment.
trying to put together a piece actually for our What Raymond Williams Means to Me series, or at least our attempts to explain some of his key concepts, or at least touch upon them. And it's such a complex and sort of ambivalent kind of project to try and really understand it and articulate it. And I wondered if you saw some parallels with that idea.
Yes, I do, and I'm aware, if you don't mind me saying so, Sharon, of bits of your writing. This is part of preparing for this talk I'm doing, and I like the notion of structures of feeling, and I think that in early human experience, the structures of feeling which celebrate our presence in the world or don't, which give us a feeling that the world is a legitimate place for us to be in, and which give us the sense that our creativity, which is of course an enormously important word to Raymond Williams, is to be celebrated. And moreover, when we take risks, we're not annihilated, but we're encouraged to continue to experiment, which I think is another implicit kind of dynamic of Raymond Williams' work. Those things seem to me very important, and I think we can begin to attach to that notions of structures of feeling. I think as well, and maybe this is where I'm wandering into landscape around Pandy.
Yeah.
Which I did know, Sharon, actually, because you asked about the relationship between Raymond Williams and me. Well, it's been in and out. I wouldn't say it's been a strong relationship, but I'm a walker. I do love walking and long distance walking, and I've walked with Helen, my wife, along Offa's Dyke, and we stayed in Pandy. And I was very much aware of Raymond Williams there. And I don't know whether you feel this when you're interpreting a literary text, but the sense of the landscape and what it evokes. And I'm thinking of the chapel, for instance, which is there in Raymond Williams' writing, not least in Border Country, and structures of feeling within the chapel, and structures of democratic feeling. So this is a religious notion where it's not necessarily a priest from on high who's delivering the interpretations, but as it were, the collectivity is being encouraged to interpret what's happening. And that feeling that you are entitled to play a part in shaping, if you like, a religious or spiritual understanding is very important. And clearly it was important to Williams.
My brother and I have been talking about structure of feeling recently, because we have this kind of troubled relationship with our own community, which is Bolsover in northeast Derbyshire. It was tough. It was very difficult to grow up in if you were different, if you were inquiring, if you were from a family that hadn't been there for a long time. And my grandfather was Welsh. He was a Welsh miner from South Wales, actually, from Abertillery. And so my family weren't historically part of that community, hadn't been there for that long. And also, my dad, as you know, went to Ruskin. So he got out, he stopped being a miner and became something else. So we were never quite part of it. But we also have this kind of deep ambivalence with it. And we were trying to understand what structure of feeling might have meant to that kind of community. The idea that somehow it's the cultural, the kind of collective culture that expresses that the structure of feeling, if you like. So it is something about the infrastructure, the place, the state structures that surround it in a town that had been a mining community. And until relatively recently, and also how people's emotional connections relate to the kind of music, the art, the literature of that place. And that's really what we've been trying to understand, but we think it's something kind of more than that. It is in those interstices between the place itself, your relationship with that place, as you say, as you're shaping that experience. Too often it's commodified and it's turned into something very shallow. So I suppose we were really struck by the depth that structures of feeling suggest, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and well, I think it's very complicated because as you know, Raymond Williams was accused of romanticizing Pandy and that community. Although, we all need our romances, I guess.
We do.
To keep us going.
Yeah.
And I think there's, I don't see communities. I mean, I come from Stoke, as you know, and it's a very working class community.
Yeah.
But it's not all completely homogeneous. There are structures of feeling which are different within,
exactly,
like an overarching structure of feeling. And I mean, I wouldn't say my parents were actively involved in workers' education, but it was on the edge of the family.
Yeah.
And so I knew that there was something different here, and I didn't experience the arts or literature or theatre as entirely other. It was a space in which I could legitimately enter, and in fact in Stoke, and again I maybe am guilty of romanticizing this, but the workers' education movement had been relatively strong, full of tumult and difficulty, but nonetheless strong. So I inherited that sense that structures of feeling in a more heterogeneous way were available within that culture. I mean, sure, I think we can romanticize working class cultures a little bit. I mean, I don't know. I imagine Pandy could also be quite restrictive in many ways. And there's a lovely image in border country where they're in the signal box and it's 1926, and the general strike, and they've got this image of what's happening just to the south of them over the Black Mountains, but they start to begin to feel they must take responsibility for the management of, quote, exceptional traffic on the railways. And then there's a sort of more general feeling of a discussion about, well, on what basis shall we make these decisions, and what might be the impact on what it is we're trying to do, and what in any case are we trying to do, what are we trying to achieve by the general. And you feel this structure of feeling and democratic possibility beginning to emerge. And I imagine in Pandy not everyone would have been overwhelmingly enthusiastic about the general strike, and not everybody in Pandy, I would imagine, would have been enthusiastic about those people on the other side of the Black Mountains who were not at all like them. But you have within this community processes that are taking place which are different, more challenging, and redolent with possibility. And I love that notion of community as heterogeneous, and all working class communities, I think, have developed within them the possibility of experiment, of doing things differently, of embracing things that are other. But of course, as you imply in what you said about Bolsover, that can take us into difficult territory, because there's a sense then about who are we and how do we belong, say, in a community, and our relationships can be a bit awkward.
Can be really awkward. And I think there's Bob Foster, who's our treasurer at the Raymond Williams Foundation and a good friend, he said, I did not love my community. He feels quite strongly, I'm kind of paraphrasing him probably badly, but he said, I love my mum and dad. They were the people who really inspired and informed me, but I didn't really love my community. I found it a difficult, hostile, tough place. And I guess as a woman myself, as a young girl, as a woman developing in a pit town who aspired to education and was very bookish, and I often felt extraordinarily alien in that kind of environment. And so I suppose my brother and I have been tussling with these troubling, ambivalent relationships with the community. And trying to figure out, how the structures related to the kind of inchoate experiences that it's very hard to articulate. And I think that's what I love about structures of feeling. It gives a framework for exploring that kind of troubled, not necessarily troubled, but complex and inchoate kind of area. I think, therefore, as you say, he must have had some relationship with Freud, at least on some level, or at least started to think psychoanalytically, at least, or at least autobiographically.
If you love literature, I can't see how you can not, as it were.
Yeah.
You might not formally, with a big capital P,
Exactly.
psychoanalysis, but you are wrestling with issues of consciousness and
exactly.
what can't be thought or is often denied or repressed, which of course is a realm of the unconscious. By the way, many of my views about working class community, in a sense, are retrospectively reconstructed. Because I wouldn't want to romanticize how I felt about the community I was brought up in. And here again, we get to the level of structures of feeling, if you like, within families. I mean, my mother was incredibly ambitious for me. And her view was that the role of education was to get out.
Yeah.
And in a way, she was projecting her own kind of desire, frustrated desire, onto me. My father was much more of that community and a working class background. But it's later when, and this is maybe it's part of the tragedy of human life, that when these things disintegrate, when that notion of a relatively confident, coherent community is undermined by, the processes of Thatcherism, the rapid unraveling of a whole structure of economic life and the social and cultural life that goes with it. When that unravels, I think I felt a real need. And as you know, in the book I wrote, Distress in the City, I was also hearing in a place which I still think of as home, the rise of racism and even Islamic fundamentalism. I was really deeply upset. And part of the journey in terms of engaging with those issues was a journey back into my own past and a kind of a reappraisal, a sort of reassessment of what a community gave to me and how valuable aspects were. And the trouble with young adolescents, can be that we don't necessarily appreciate the good that surrounds us.
No, we don't.
So I wish I'd been more like Raymond, or at least the way Raymond, purports himself to have been, in that, his strong relationship with his father, and mine is only developed in recent years, and he's long dead.
Yeah.
But the strong relationship that Raymond has with his father, that he talks about in various places, trade unionist, socialist, of a laborist kind. And a man, there's a very interesting notion somewhere, it may be in Border Country, but it's referred to in the Resources of Hope as well, I think, about a man of value who worked things out for himself, who knew what was of value.
Yes, absolutely.
And I found that deeply moving. And I think in a sense, this is a slightly eccentric way of building connections, but I think I've discovered my own father in a sense as a man of value.
Absolutely, and I was similarly very close to my father, and my dad, to me, represents a deep integrity, and that is also what I feel extraordinarily powerfully moved by in Raymond Williams' work. It's the little piece that Terry Eagleton's written that I forwarded to you.
Lovely. That
absolutely beautiful sense of deep personal composure. I thought that was, and I think that's there throughout his work. His children were talking about how, he was critiqued, he was challenged by some of the other faculty members when he was at Cambridge, and he was never discomposed somehow. And for my mind, he carries that personal conviction, that thread of continuity with his father and with the landscape, something implacable and undamageable, if that's the right expression. a kind of internal composure. And I'm sure he wasn't always composed and at ease with himself, but it kind of comes through in that total integrity and conviction in his writing, in my view.
Yeah, I agree, and I suppose, and I don't know, we need him here with us in a sense to talk about this deep sense of ease that Terry Eagleton mentions. I mean, that does suggest, to me anyway, thinking about his family. Is that clock going to bother us?
It's funny. I always recall that clock whenever I talk to you.
I know, sorry. Well, it's an old family
I love it.
from Stoke, and I always find it's a nice friend for me. It reminds me of where I come from.
I love it. I love the sound.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about this sense of ease that he had in himself. Now, I guess it was there, and I guess that is something to do with Pandy and the quality of his relationships with people. Clearly, he never, in a sense, left Pandy. It's always there in his imagination. And but on the other hand, I can't believe he wasn't deeply troubled at times, because I don't believe you can write in the way that he has written without a sense of deep perplexity and concern. And I don't think his relationship with his father or with Pandy was as uncomplicated as some might suggest. And when you talk about Bolsover, I mean, I can't immediately quote chapter and verse, but I guess he was well aware of something that he wanted to scream and shout about in that kind of border Welsh culture. On the other hand, he was pretty solid, I think.